You thought peace would feel warmer than this. That is the first shock. Not louder joy, not instant gratitude, just warmth, relief, a softer nervous system, a life that finally stops bracing. But when the chaos ends, many people do not meet peace first. They meet emptiness. They meet a strange flatness, a silence that does not feel peaceful yet, only unfamiliar. And Carl Jung would say that this reaction is not a failure of healing. It is a revelation of what your psyche had been built around for too long. A real-life example makes this painfully clear. Someone finally leaves a toxic relationship. No more mixed signals. No more late-night panic. No more emotional guessing. No more waiting for the next message that would either soothe them or destroy them. Friends expect relief. The person expects relief too. But after the first few days, something much stranger appears. They feel dull, restless, unmotivated, quiet, but not in a comforting way. It is as if the relationship was destroying them, yet its absence has removed some kind of fuel. That contradiction is where this whole section begins. Because Carl Jung would not ask only what ended. He would ask what psychic structure the chaos had been maintaining. What identity did the tension support? What emotional rhythm had the mind and body adapted to so completely that calm now feels almost alien when life has been organized around uncertainty, drama, hypervigilance, or pursuit? Those states stop feeling like interruptions. They start feeling like the atmosphere of being alive. This is why peace can feel empty. Not because peace is empty, because your old self was full of reaction. Chaos gave constant work to the psyche. Something to monitor, something to interpret, someone to chase, something to fear, something to fix, something to survive. The ego stayed occupied. The body stayed activated. The imagination stayed flooded with what-if scenarios. There was pain in that, yes, but there was also intensity. And intensity can become confused with aliveness when a person has not known much else. Carl Jung understood that the psyche adapts around repeated emotional climates. If confusion, longing, and instability shaped a long stretch of your life, then those states do not remain merely unpleasant. They become psychologically familiar. They begin organizing attention, desire, and identity. A person may even begin to feel most like themselves when under emotional pressure. Then, when the pressure vanishes, they do not feel liberated immediately. They feel disoriented. Another example is not romantic at all. Someone grows up in a volatile household where tension is normal, raised voices, subtle emotional unpredictability, the need to read rooms quickly, the constant feeling that something may shift at any moment. Years later, they finally build a calmer life, good partner, safer home, stable routines. Yet the peace feels thin. They cannot settle. They keep waiting for something to go wrong. Their body almost misses the pressure. Jung would say the psyche is not missing suffering in any noble sense. It is missing the emotional conditions around which it learned to organize itself. That distinction matters, because many people feel ashamed when peace feels flat. They think something must be wrong with them. They say things like, "Why do I miss the chaos?" Or, "Why does calm feel boring?" Carl Jung would answer with more seriousness and more compassion than most modern advice ever does. He would say the question is not whether you truly want pain back. The question is what parts of your identity still depend on stimulation, fear, longing, and unresolved tension in order to feel real. That is the hidden wound. Sometimes a person does not miss the relationship, the conflict, the social circle, the work crisis, or the unstable chapter itself. They miss the emotional occupation it created. They miss having something urgent to revolve around. They miss the sense of movement. Even if that movement was destructive, peace asks something entirely different. It removes the old emotional labor. It takes away the outer chaos, and with it, the familiar role you played inside that chaos. That role may have been the fixer, the one who waits, the one who understands everything, the one who survives, the one who keeps going. The one who is always reading hidden meanings, the one who proves love through endurance, the one who feels intensely and therefore feels alive. Carl Jung would say that once peace arrives, those identities lose their function. That can feel like freedom eventually. At first, it often feels like loss. This is why some people leave chaos and immediately create new versions of it. Not always dramatic versions. Smaller ones. They start checking for problems, picking emotional fights, reopening old conversations, revisiting painful memories, consuming drama online, romanticizing the past, returning mentally to what once overwhelmed them. The psyche is trying to restore stimulation because stillness feels too unstructured. Jung would not call that stupidity. He would call it unconscious loyalty to an old psychic arrangement. And until that arrangement becomes conscious, peace will keep feeling like a blank space instead of a real home. That is the first truth of this video. When the chaos ends, emptiness is often the first thing you meet because the old self no longer knows how to feel alive without the noise. Carl Jung would say that the emptiness people feel after chaos ends is not simply emotional. It is structural. Something in the psyche has lost its organizing center, and nothing new has fully taken its place yet. That is why the silence feels so uncomfortable. It is not just quiet. It is unstructured. And an unstructured inner life can feel more threatening than a chaotic one that the ego has spent years organizing itself around tension, urgency, and reaction. This is where Jung would bring in one of his most important ideas. The ego does not only attach to people and situations, it attaches to patterns of experience. If someone has lived inside emotional intensity for a long time, the psyche begins to rely on that intensity as a form of orientation. It tells a person where they are, who they are, and what matters. Even if the pattern is painful, it is familiar, and familiarity creates a kind of unconscious stability. A real-life example shows this clearly. Someone leaves a relationship filled with emotional highs and lows. They cried often. They felt anxious often. They felt alive often. Everything was amplified. When the relationship ends, they expect calm to feel like relief. Instead, calm feels like nothing. No urgency. No emotional spikes. No dramatic closeness. No intense longing. At first, this feels like peace. Then it begins to feel like absence. And that absence can be misinterpreted. The person may say, maybe I didn't love them enough, or maybe something is missing in my life now, or even maybe I need that intensity to feel something real. Jung would say that interpretation is misleading. What is being missed is not love itself. It is the emotional structure that love had been fused with. Intensity is not the same as depth, but the psyche can confuse the two when it has not experienced grounded stability for long enough. This is where Jung's idea of the complex becomes essential. A complex is not just a memory or a wound. It is a pattern of emotional energy that organizes how a person experiences the world. If someone carries a complex around chaos, instability, or emotional unpredictability, then situations that mirror those conditions will feel strangely magnetic. They activate the complex. They give the psyche something to plug into. When the chaos ends, the complex does not disappear immediately. It becomes restless. It looks for stimulation. It looks for something to attach to. And if nothing appears externally, it may begin generating internal tension instead. Overthinking, doubt, restlessness, nostalgia, the urge to reopen old wounds, the urge to re-engage with people or situations that once destabilized them. Jung would say this is the psyche trying to restore a familiar rhythm, not because the person wants to suffer, because the psyche has not yet learned how to live without that pattern. This is also where the fear of inner stillness appears. Stillness is not empty in itself, but to a psyche trained on intensity, stillness feels like a lack of signal, no urgency, no emotional spike, no immediate meaning, no dramatic narrative. And without those signals, the ego may begin to feel lost. Jung would say that the ego often depends on outer events to define itself. When those events become quieter, the ego must turn inward, and that inward turn is not easy, because inward space is less structured. It does not give immediate answers. It does not provide instant stimulation. It requires patience, reflection, and the ability to stay with experience without needing to convert it into action or reaction right away. Many people have not developed that capacity yet. So instead of entering stillness, they escape it. A simple modern example makes this visible. Someone finally reaches a stable phase of life. No crisis, no emotional chaos, no urgent problem to solve. And yet they feel uneasy, so they start filling the space. Endless scrolling, constant distraction, overcommitment, creating minor conflicts, seeking stimulation wherever they can find it, not because they consciously want chaos back, but because silence feels like nothing is happening. Jung would say something very direct here. If you cannot tolerate stillness, you will unconsciously recreate disturbance. That is not a moral failure. It is a psychological pattern, and it will continue until the person becomes conscious of it. This is also where identity becomes central. Who are you when you are not reacting? Who are you when you are not fixing something, chasing someone, surviving something, or trying to decode emotional uncertainty? For many people, that question has no immediate answer, because their identity was built in response to chaos, not in relation to inner being. Jung would call this a developmental gap. The person knows how to be in movement. They do not yet know how to be in presence. That is why peace can feel like emptiness. It is not that nothing is there. It is that the psyche has not yet learned how to experience meaning without intensity. This is also why some people romanticize their past chaos after leaving it. They remember the highs, the passion, the intensity, the feeling of being deeply involved in something emotionally charged. They forget the exhaustion, the anxiety, the instability. Jung would say the psyche edits memory in favor of what kept it activated. The complex wants to return to its familiar territory. But returning would not solve the problem. It would only restore the old structure. The real work is something else entirely. It is learning how to build a new inner structure that does not depend on chaos to feel alive. That means discovering forms of meaning that are quieter, attention that is steadier, connection that is less dramatic but more real, a sense of self that is not defined by reaction but by presence. Jung would say this is the beginning of individuation, not the dramatic version people imagine, a much quieter one, the ability to remain with oneself when nothing urgent is happening, the ability to let life be simple without feeling like something is missing, the ability to experience calm not as emptiness, but as space. But that shift does not happen immediately. There is always a transitional phase. And in that phase, peace often feels like a void, not because it is empty, because the old structure is gone and the new one has not yet been built. Carl Jung would say the real task is not simply leaving chaos. It is learning how to feel alive without it. That is a completely different level of work. Because once the old intensity is gone, the psyche does not automatically know what to do with calm. It has to be retrained. It has to discover a new way of relating to life that is not built on urgency, reaction, or emotional spikes. And that process is slow, unfamiliar, and often uncomfortable in ways people do not expect. The first shift is understanding that emptiness is not failure. It is transition. When chaos ends, the space occupied does not instantly fill with meaning. There is a gap. Jung would call this a liminal phase, a threshold where the old identity is dissolved, but the new one is not yet formed. In this phase, the psyche may feel flat, unmotivated, even disconnected. But that flatness is not proof that something is wrong. It is proof that something old has stopped working. A real-life example shows this clearly. Someone leaves a high-intensity job that consumed their time, energy, and identity. For years, they woke up with urgency, stress, and a constant sense of pressure. Then they leave. The first few days feel like relief. Then the silence sets in. No constant emails. No deadlines. No adrenaline. They feel lost. They start questioning their decision. They think maybe they made a mistake. But Jung would say they are not lost. They are unstructured. And unstructured space feels like emptiness until it becomes inhabited. That leads to the second shift, learning to tolerate low stimulation. This is one of the most overlooked psychological skills. If your nervous system has been trained on intensity, then calm will feel underwhelming at first. Conversations may feel slower. Relationships may feel less dramatic. Days may feel quieter. Nothing is wrong with these experiences. They are simply not stimulating in the same way chaos was. Jung would say you have to resist the impulse to immediately judge that as boredom or lack. Because if you label calm as boring too quickly, you will unconsciously seek intensity again. You will reopen old patterns, re-engage unstable people, or create new forms of emotional disturbance just to feel something recognizable. The psyche will choose familiar pain over unfamiliar peace if peace has not yet been learned as meaningful. So the work is to stay. Stay with the quiet conversation. Stay with the uneventful day. Stay with the relationship that feels stable but not dramatic. Stay with the absence of urgency. At first, this feels like nothing. Over time, it becomes something else. It becomes ground. The third shift is rebuilding identity around presence instead of reaction. This is where Jung's idea of individuation becomes real in everyday life. If your identity was built around being the one who fixes, survives, chases, or endures, then you need a new way to define yourself, not through chaos, but through conscious relation to your own life. This means asking different questions. Not, what problem do I need to solve? But, what am I experiencing right now? Not, who needs me? But, what I need. Not, what is happening next? But, what is here already? These questions seem simple, but they shift the center of gravity inward. They move the self away from constant reaction and toward awareness. Jung would say this is how the psyche begins to reorganize itself around being, not doing. A practical example makes this clearer. Instead of filling every quiet moment with distraction, someone begins to notice small things. The rhythm of their day, the feeling of their body without tension, the way a stable relationship feels when it is not dramatic, the way their thoughts slow down when they are not constantly scanning for problems. At first, these experiences feel insignificant. Over time, they become the new markers of aliveness. That is the fourth shift, redefining what aliveness means. If aliveness has always meant intensity, then peace will feel dead. But aliveness can also mean presence. It can mean depth without drama, connection without anxiety, movement without urgency. Jung would say this redefinition is essential. Otherwise, the person will keep chasing emotional highs, mistaking them for meaning, and avoiding the quieter forms of life that actually sustain the psyche over time. The fifth shift is allowing grief to surface. Because underneath the emptiness, there is often grief. Grief for the time spent in chaos. Grief for the version of yourself that lived inside it. Grief for the intensity that once felt like love, even if it was unstable. Grief for the identity you are leaving behind. Jung would say that grief is part of the transition. It is what allows the psyche to release the old structure fully. Without it, the person may keep one foot in the past, ready to return to familiar patterns at the first sign of discomfort. So instead of escaping the emptiness, the work is to move through it, to let it reveal what is underneath. And finally, the most important shift is this. You stop asking life to feel intense all the time. That expectation is what keeps people trapped. Life is not meant to be constant emotional stimulation. It moves in rhythms, highs and lows, movement and stillness, engagement and rest. If you demand intensity, you will create it, even when it costs you your peace. Jung would say maturity is not the absence of feeling. It is the ability to remain connected to yourself when the feeling is quiet. That is what changes everything. Because once you can do that, peace stops feeling like emptiness. It starts feeling like space. And in that space, something new can finally grow, not driven by chaos, not dependent on intensity, but rooted in a deeper, steadier form of aliveness. Carl Jung would say the deepest misunderstanding is not that people leave chaos. It is that they expect peace to feel instantly meaningful in the same way chaos once did. That expectation is the real trap, because chaos gives immediate feedback. It gives urgency. It gives emotional spikes. It gives something to fix, chase, decode, survive. Peace does not do that. Peace removes the noise. And when the noise disappears, what you're left with is not always instant relief. It is space. And space, at first, can feel like nothing. That is why so many people misread the moment. They think, something is missing. This feels empty. I was more alive before. But Carl Jung would say nothing essential is missing. What is missing is the stimulation your psyche had learned to depend on. That is a completely different thing. You are not lacking life. You are adjusting to a new form of it. And that adjustment takes time. Because your identity, your nervous system, your patterns of attention, even your sense of meaning were shaped in response to chaos. When that disappears, You do not instantly become a peaceful person. You become a person in transition, a person whose old structure has fallen away, but whose new structure is not yet fully formed. That is why peace can feel like a void before it feels like a home. And Jung would say that void is not something to escape. It is something to inhabit, because inside that quiet, something important is happening. You are no longer reacting. You are no longer surviving. You are no longer organizing your life around instability. You are beginning, slowly, to meet yourself without interruption. That meeting is not dramatic. It does not come with emotional fireworks. It comes with stillness, repetition, simplicity, and a different kind of awareness. And if you stay there long enough, something shifts. The quiet stops feeling empty. It starts feeling stable. The absence of urgency stops feeling boring. It starts feeling safe. The lack of intensity stops feeling like loss. It starts feeling like clarity. That is the transformation. Not sudden, not loud, but real. So before we close, sit with one direct question. Are you actually missing the chaos, or are you missing the version of yourself that only knew how to feel alive inside it? Stay with that, because the answer will show you exactly where your growth is. If this resonates, write in the comments one thing that now makes more sense about why peace has felt uncomfortable for you. And if you know someone who left a chaotic chapter of their life, but secretly feels lost without it, share this video with them. Because sometimes the hardest truth to accept is this. Peace does not feel like peace right away. Not because it is empty, but because you are learning for the first time how to live without needing chaos to feel alive. And Carl Jung would say that learning is not the end of something. It is the beginning of becoming someone new.